everybody, and welcome to Toffee Bluecast. Yes, we are live, international break, but we have a cracking guest for you. He's on the cover, so you know who he is. And we're really excited for this one because it feels like perfect timing, doesn't it, Paul, to drop this guest for Everton fans.
It was like Shawn arranged it for us, especially, and the Everton lads just knew that we'd have Dan on to think all things about the mind and psychology, and as it says in there, our heads went at the weekend. Couldn't have timed it better, could we?
Yes, our heads are completely gone. We've called him, we rang him, we were struggling as fans, we're struggling understanding the manager, we're struggling understanding the players. So we've called the psychologist in. Of course we have, because that's what the Toffee Bluecast do. And we're excited for this one. So we're going to give him a bit of an introduction, as we always do.
I didn't know what to do there, guys. Wow, that was intimidating. Did you want me to dance or something? Do a little jig?
You never know.
It was like a boxer's ring entry or something like that.
It was. Yeah. Build up.
You never know what you're going to do. You never know. Sports psychologist, super confident. You could have been dancing. You could have done the big fish, little fish cardboard box. I don't know. But yeah, we had to give you a bit of entrance music because we're happy to have you on. What a guest. Dan Abrahams,
I think that's lesson number one in sports psychology on psychology. Confidence is very contextual. I'm a confident sports psychologist. I'm not a confident dancer. So, there was no way I was going to dance there.
So there's only one person who's the confident dancer in the three of us, believe me. I've seen him.
I do like to dance, to be fair. It makes me feel good. But some people don't. I get it. I completely get it. There's loads of people coming on. By the way, we'll start off by saying, Dan, we're going to ask him about himself, but I'm going to drop the banner on as well underneath to let you know what's cracking. We're going to go through different topics and stuff like that. It's going to be a really good listen. If you can, get your questions in, make them appropriate. We're looking forward. I'm pretty sure we'll get some good answers on them. And it should be a cracking show. So, yeah, let's get started. Dan Abrahams. Tell us about yourself.
Oh man, where do I start? That's a big question. Sports psychologist. I have 28 years in high performance sport. I originally started as a professional golfer, failed miserably as a professional golfer, didn't win any money whatsoever, largely because of what was going on between my two ears. Although my mates would probably say a lack of talent was kind of present in my golf. So there's that argument. Anyway, so I always had a real interest in the psychological side of the game. So when I failed as a professional golfer, I did start to coach golf. I became a PGA golf coach. But at that time, I decided to go and do all of my qualifications as a psychologist. And then 18 years ago, I fully qualified and I became a registered psychologist here in the UK. And I've worked across all sports, but predominantly in football, even though I was a golfer. And I've worked heavily in golf, working with players on both sides of the Atlantic. And I was lead psychologist for England golf for 3 years, a decade ago. But I've mainly worked in football. I've worked at half a dozen Premier League clubs, an array of championship clubs around the world. I have just finished at Feyenoord over the last 2 years. So we won the Dutch Eredivisie a couple of years ago, Dutch Cup last year. And obviously Feyenoord have been in the news for the last 6 months because your main rivals snapped up my former boss there, right? Arne Slot. So I worked with Arne closely for the last 2 seasons. I've written 4 books, but 3 of them football. One of them Soccer Tough. Very kindly, Gareth Bale said changed his life a few years ago. I don't think it changed his life, but I owe him a beer because it sold a few books off the back of that, as you can imagine. The other book is a golf book. Golf Tough. I was lead psychologist going into the 2019 Rugby World Cup, working alongside Eddie Jones. And I'm also currently the Aston Martin Formula One psychologist. And I work a lot in motorsport. So I work across a range of sports. But to be quite honest with you, football has been the predominant one. So, yeah, just honoured, delighted to be here with you guys and seeing if I can answer a few of your questions.
Do you feel, on what you just said, do you feel like you need to know the sports to be a psychologist? Do you have to study what's going on in the sports?
That's such a great question. Look, there's two answers to that, because yes and no. No, in as much as in many respects you can thrive in these environments by saying, hey, look, I'm not an expert of football, or I'm not an expert of tennis, or I'm not an expert of boxing or golf or whatever, but you've got plenty of people around you who are experts, your coaches, the sports scientists, etc., etc. So, you can say, I'm not an expert. You've got plenty of experts around you, but I am an expert in human performance, human functioning, and human learning. So you can sell it that way. However, the flip side of that is it is good to get to know the language and the specific challenges that players and coaches have in certain sports. If you can really drill down and become an expert in certain sports. And that's what I've tried to do. Like, having been a pro golfer, I know golf like the back of my hand. So I don't have to do any more research on that. I can draw from my psychology knowledge and experience and draw from my golf experience and bring those together. Football, what I did about 18, 19 years ago is I was like, I am going to specialize in football. I really wanted to, because I was passionate about the game. And so I started in non-league football. I'm a Londoner. I started in Southeast London at a club called Fisher Athletic, who played in Step 6, so 6th division in the pyramid. And because I really wanted to get in there and really learn the game, learn the specific challenges, learn the language, and build from there. So that's how I really heavily got into football. So in many respects, yes, and in many respects, no, if that makes any sense. There's a dual answer to that question, but it is a great answer. And I think ultimately it is an advantage if you really know the sport. There's no question about it. You can really drill down on some great psychological tools if you really know the sport. But if you don't, it doesn't mean you can't work in it. It just means you don't have that language. You don't have that expertise. But that's okay.
No, I was thinking that because I understand that as well, because if you think about it, if you played the sport, you know how it makes you feel. Like, for example, you said you played golf quite a high level. So when you played golf, you know how those shots make you feel mentally. So you know how to put, when people are saying, I feel like this after this shot, then you can go straight in and think, yeah, I felt like that as well. And you understand it a little bit more. But when you've got all these theories and ways of making people deal with stuff, I suppose you've always got an answer to how to help people in all different areas. Football, you've got the football in you, and we'll get on to a bit of Everton here. I can see the comments coming in. We will chuck your questions on as we go. We can't chuck them on straight away, but we'll chuck them on as you go. Everton have been in 3 relegation battles. 3 relegation battles. Crystal Palace. Campaigners. Yes, we are. Crystal Palace was like second from last game. We managed to beat Crystal Palace with a chance of going down. Turned us grey. Then the next season, the last game of the season, it was down to us fans again, because our football club was run really badly. And all people keep saying is it starts from the top, and if it's not run properly, we're not going to be successful. So it was left to us fans to keep our football club up, and it felt like it was on the fans. Dan, like we was doing spaces after games. People was crying on the spaces. I'm not even joking. Like, Everton Football Club means everything to. It's the people's club. Like, people was getting really emotional and didn't want to get relegated. Of course they didn't. And the spaces was good. It was a good rehab. That's the reason we got into this channel, because we thought we need a platform for Everton fans just to get together when we're struggling and get together and celebrate when we're doing well. So we struggled against Bournemouth last game, and then last season it was point deductions, and it was a scary season for us last season. Shawn Dyche, we took that as the first topic, Paul. Shawn Dyche, like managers, not Shawn Dyche, but managers.
Managers.
So you've dealt with managers. Like, you can't tell us what you've said in your stuff with managers, but generally, what do you think on what a manager has to go through? Because we're stressed with Shawn Dyche at the minute.
Okay, well, look, big question. I can't speak about Shawn Dyche per se, but management is a tough job. It really is. I'm not here to defend any failures or any successes or speak to any successes, but managing a club is tough. You've got to do a host of things. You've got to work cross departmentally. You've got to keep as many players happy as possible, especially players you've got to leave out the team. You've just got a host of things to do. It is an enormously challenging occupation. But that isn't to suggest that other occupations aren't challenging, and it isn't to suggest that they haven't put themselves in that position. Ultimately, the job demands enormous amounts of competence and confidence. Okay, and maybe there's quite a few out there who have an enormous amount of confidence, but not necessarily an enormous amount of competence, or not as much competence as you might think. And you do have to be competent on the technical, tactical, physical, mental, intellectual, strategical side of things. You've got to have a lot of strings to your bow. A manager these days is not just a coach; it is a leader. So I, on the one hand, ultimately, they put themselves in this position. They know it's going to be tough. They know it's going to be stressful. But you've got to build the competence. So that's what they've got to do. What they have to do is pull on as many resources as possible in order to help them optimize the team. They've got to utilize the people around them, not just their assistant coaches, but also support staff. They've got to have the right support staff, and they've got to utilize them in the right way. They've got to have lots of ideas, not just tactically, but also know how to optimize players when it comes to game day. Which can be a challenge. So I don't know if you have any specific questions, but my first answer to you is, yeah, look, it's a hard job. That's okay. You've just got to be damn good at what you do. And if you're not good enough, you're going to lose your position. End of story. What specific questions do you have for me?
As an Everton fan, the thing that's frustrating us at the minute is Shawn Dyche he's brought in, first of all, we had Irabunum, a young lad that wanted to got in, but he had to play because we had a player injured. We don't think Dyche would have put him in, but he played because we had a player injured. And he was young, and he come in, and he's been one of our best players. We also signed Njayi, O'Brien. We signed some young players, basically, that we feel as fans are ready. And when they've played in the friendlies and the cup game, they've looked more capable than the players that we've been seeing last season. But Shawn Dyche is massively being stubborn on putting them in. Just like Njayi, he played Njayi in the cup, said he isn't Premier League ready. Then he played him last game and he looked our best player again. So us fans personally, we're having a big problem, ain't we, Paul, with Dyche with his selection of players and not making substitutions that early.
Yeah, I think Shawn tends to keep a lot close to him and behind closed doors and everything. And there's many fans who actually kind of appreciate that, but at the same time, they want to know what's going on. So when Shawn makes decisions, as in substitutes or maybe keeping younger players out of the first 11 and things like that, it's frustrating for the fans. But from your sort of speciality and things, does the fans fume and fury and everything else that we do, does that hold an effect on the manager very much? Because imagine that they've got to have such tough skin to get into a position where they currently are.
That's difficult to answer because I would imagine it's quite individual specific. Managers are human beings, and it would be impossible for anybody to completely ignore the outside noise. They might try to, they might attempt to, but completely ignoring outside noise, I don't think you'd necessarily want to. Ultimately, a club is about the fans. It's about the organisation. It's about the wider community. And so subsequently, I think a good head coach or good manager is going to keep their ear to the ground with regard to, fans' opinions. Absolutely. But ultimately, coaching is a decision-making process. And really, you can only make effective decisions based on the data that's in front of you. And you do have to remember, and this is not defending anybody, but you do have to remember that the head coach, the manager, whatever you want to call him, is going to be exposed to data that you don't know about, and that could be physical data. It could be behavioural observations based on what they've seen historically in closed under 23s games. It could be the opinions of senior players in the team in terms of their the cohesion that they can experience with those younger players. That's one thing that you don't necessarily see from the outside. Is you don't necessarily see all the factors that add up to managers making the decisions that they do. It's what makes coaching so tough. It is a decision-making process where you have to collate a lot of information and choose based off of that information. And it's not I don't even know the players that you're speaking to, so I have no skin in this game, and I have no value judgment in terms of what's going on at Everton. But that's often what's happening behind the scenes. Of course, when I've not sat directly on a bench, but I've sat behind benches at the clubs that I've worked at, and that these coaches can hear things. I was 8 years ago, one of the clubs I worked at was Derby County, and I had the pleasure of working closely with Steve McLaren, who can tend to be a much maligned person in the world of football, yet is a pretty competent coach. And he would say himself, that he was listening to the criticisms and he was taking them on board, and he would absolutely keep an open mind with relation to what others were saying, whether those were members of the board, whether they were fans, any kind of outside noise. So they're human beings. They feel, they hear, they sense what's going on, and so subsequently they will act. However, they primarily have to act on the data that they are subject to every single day. When you sit in the coach's office and you have the coaches in the room with the manager, they are having conversations that are broad and deep, related to the data that they have in front of them, making their decisions. Do some of those have certain, what we in psychology would call cognitive biases, a thinking bias? Very probably every human being does. Would that include head coaches or managers who have biases against playing younger players because they have a lack of trust in younger players, maybe because they've been burnt before, or maybe because they think the player who's had 400 appearances in the Belgium league is going to fare better than the player who hasn't had an appearance in any league? Again, very probably, very possibly, and one can understand that. So yeah, look, it's a complex situation where complicated decisions are being made, and I can absolutely understand where fans get very, very frustrated, because I think they see it in a certain way, and yet managers, head coaches will have their data and their biases, and the two don't always marry, the two don't always meet.
Yeah, I mean, Bob does think, do you think hypnotising Dyche will help Dyche forget that he's Everton manager? I don't know whether that's the technique that we've done, but actually, what you were saying, Dan, as well, kind of links into what's been happening recently, because team selection is always going to be a thing, whether you're top of the league or where kind of we are at the bottom at the moment. It's always going to be a thing for fans, and it's every week before the game, the team comes out, and again we see this player is playing, this player who maybe has not had a great run of form or things like that, and we're thinking, why does the manager play that player all the time? And like you say, it must just come back to those habits. Is it difficult for managers to kind of change from one mindset to another, really, that they've had for so long?
Yeah, again, a manager being a human being can have tendencies and habits and beliefs and fears and doubts and worries and expectations and values, and they will have their ultimately, I suppose the best summary would be they will have their lens of the world. And thus, it's very easy to fall into a stuck habit of decision making, or a stuck pattern of process, if you like. Again, that's not to speak to anybody, in particular, but it is to suggest that, of course, that absolutely happens. Of course, it does. So they absolutely might be doing it for the best of the team, or maybe they're making an error and maybe they're making a mistake. One of the most destructive things that you have as a manager is if you have a coaching staff who just simply agree with you, and that very much exists out there. It's absolutely imperative that a manager has 2 or 3 coaches, at least 1 or 2 of them, of the 3 or 4, are going to actually challenge you. Otherwise, it becomes an echo chamber. So the makeup of your coaching staff as a manager is absolutely vital. Again, I can't speak for who that is at Everton, and I'm not speaking for this at any particular club, but my experience has always been you have to have people who are going to challenge you. In fact, I read an article today that was on X about Pep Guardiola and Juanmi Lilo, I think his name is, his one of his assistants. He said he brought him in basically because he's more intelligent than me, because I want to be challenged, and because we're going to have a lot of disagreements, we're going to have some arguments, and that's absolutely imperative. What you find is sometimes that doesn't exist, because sometimes managers feel more comfortable with people around them saying yes and being agreeable, because it can feel very uncomfortable for a manager to have 1 or 2 people who are being disagreeable, who are perhaps pushing back or challenging. So you have to be able to come out your comfort zone from that perspective, and fight your corner, if you like, or present your argument as a manager. So that can absolutely create stuck patterns of decision making and process. So yeah, I think really absolutely it can happen. They are human beings. As long as you've got human beings who are managers, before the robots take over, then there's going to be errors, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be habits and patterns.
Yeah, I mean, Bob came up with another comment there. He said Deitch is interested in psychology, and he talks about it. He talks about it a lot, really. Sort of when he's talked about masterclasses and all that sort of stuff. He has mentioned sports psychology quite a lot, but a few Everton fans sort of agree with Bob in saying that, like you were saying, to be able to change that mindset and say, I'm not going to play this person who I've worked with constantly for the past 10 years at a previous club and then brought in, but then they've not been playing well. Some fans do worry that maybe he can't do what you've just said and be able to adapt and change that mindset and everything else. Is it usually something that you would see sort of at the top leagues that managers are able to? Because I would imagine that you'd have to be not stuck in your ways, that's probably the wrong phrase, but strong-willed, strong of mind, how you feel about it yourself personally. I can't see many of them being able to change mindset very often, to drop a player like that or to change formation against their principles.
Look, the most important skills that coaches have are not particularly funky skills. They are self skills. self skills, and you can argue about this. You can argue this is the case for anybody in any walk of life. Self skills are your most important skills, and by self skills, you can break that down to 4. It would be self-awareness, self-control, self-reflection, and self-development. Those are your 4 most crucial self skills in life. And if you're not engaging in self-awareness, if you're not self-aware, you can't self-control. If you can't self-control, you're not going to self-reflect. If you're not going to self-reflect, you're not going to self-develop. Self-reflection is vital. Who are my coaches here? Are they helping me? Are they challenging me? What decisions am I making? Why am I making these decisions? What other options do I have on the table here? Why might I make those options? Essentially, who, what, how, why, within those self skills. So every single day, these coaches and these managers have to take time out to reflect on their judgment and decision making, and make a decision as to whether they're going to stick or they're going to twist. Who, what, how, why is absolutely crucial when wrapped up in self skills. And it's the difference between, if you've got 10 years of experience, have you got 10 times 1 year of experience, or have you got multiple years experience adding up to 10 years? It's absolutely critical to be able to self-reflect. So again, I can't speak for any coach. Some of the coaches I've worked with have been really, really good at that. When I was involved with England Rugby, as much as by the end of his tenure at England Rugby, Eddie Jones was much maligned, he was a real self-developer, and he was really into his coaches developing themselves. He was absolutely brutal with them and absolutely insistent on them developing themselves, which I think is an important part of the process. So really, the answer to your question is wrapped up on how effective a head coach or manager is at their self skills. They've got to be self-aware, they've got to self-control, they've got to self-reflect, and they've got to have a process of self-development. And what I would say to you, I suppose, to bring this to life a little bit, if I may, and I don't want to annoy anybody on this, because I'm now going to speak a little bit about Arne Slot at Feyenoord, because obviously he's just he's across the road.
I had to do some sort of Everton thing then, did I? Like,
Instinct. Yeah.
We beat them 2-0, so you can talk about them. We beat them 2-0 last time we played them.
Well, there you go.
We're on top. We're on top. You know what I mean? They lost the league at Goodison Park. Go on.
He would be somebody that when I went, again, respecting what I can talk about, because I can't talk about everything, but when I stepped into that environment, I was confronted by somebody who was open-minded enough to have a conversation with me, because I was brought in by the head of performance and the head of medical. And they introduced me to him, and I delivered to him, and we had a good conversation, and he challenged me. He pushed back on a number of things. I won those arguments, but there you go. That's why I stayed there for 2 years. But he challenged me. He had a real BS detector, basically. But he didn't dismiss it. He didn't dismiss me at hand, which some managers might do. It's just getting that balance between being open-minded but having a suitable enough BS radar that you're not just going to take anything on board. That is really good self-awareness. That's really good self-reflection. So that's a critical part of the process.
Because I think we've mentioned it before about I'm going to mention obviously Dice as well, but the after-match conferences, press conferences, and it's going to be a case we're not doing very well, so it's not going to be all smiles and joking and everything else. However, the questions that have been posed to him have been very much, as we've mentioned, why have you maybe not done this, or why did we not do that, or why did we not do this? And you can tell more and more that he's becoming more frustrated with those questions. And I know he's going to get a few of the same kind of question. However, is it, from a psychology point of view, is it dangerous to admit those sort of glaring mistakes. For example, the Bournemouth game, it seemed from a layman's point of view that the substitutions did not work and the game changed as soon as those substitutions were made. However, in the press conference, Shawn's approach to those questions were very much like, these players had a plan, they should have executed it, and it went horribly wrong, and I'll be having words with them. So is it dangerous for a manager from a psychological point of view to admit mistakes, basically?
Well, your players are listening in. I don't think there's anything wrong with you attributing yourself as the manager as being at fault. I think it's a useful public strategy to have, because when you blame the players, when you externalize blame, they're listening, and that's a problem. You talk about AFC Bournemouth. I worked for 3 years in the Bournemouth medical department, and in medical departments, you hear a lot of conversation going on with players. And I can assure you, players listen keenly. Don't think for 1 second, don't think for 1 second that at Manchester City, every single player is happy there. You know, this is one of the biggest myths, that the clubs at the top of the league, that all the players are happy, the clubs at the bottom of the league, all the players are miserable or whatever. You know, the reality is these cultures are messy. They are complex. We're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with 25 players, millionaires. We're dealing with a bunch of coaching staff who have certain egos. You're dealing with a huge entourage of auxiliary staff. People listen to these things. So it's really, really challenging for managers to get the messaging right, but one should have a strategy. So blaming yourself isn't a bad strategy. Saying, hey, I was responsible here, you know, I'm the manager, I'm in charge, I should be doing, this is about us, and this is about me leading this team and helping them to be successful in those moments. But one thing I would say, and I apologies if I'm getting away from your specific question, but I wrote about this the other day, with the Bournemouth game. The problem isn't your substitutions. And I say that without being in the environment and without knowing what goes on in there. So I don't want to make any assumptions, because that would be unethical of me. But this is rife across the Premier League. And this is my big bugbear. And this is what we did really well at Feyenoord. And this is what I brought in. And that's mental frameworks. That is a club, a team having an appropriate mental framework that allows them to play to the bitter end with attention, intensity, and intent. Okay, you've got to continue to play proactively, purposefully, and positively till the 96th minute. You have to have the capacity to do that, and that can be trained, right? You have to play with the right intensity, the right mental activation to the 96th minute, and that can be trained and should be trained in every activity, in every single session, every day. It is inexcusable not to do that. You have to have players who must be able to flex their attention away from the distractions in the final few minutes. That is imperative. That's the conversations we had back in September 2022 with Arne Slot, when we looked at the season and thought, yeah, we've got a good chance of winning the Eredivisie. We haven't beaten Ajax away from home for 17 years, which we eventually did. We have to have good mental frameworks working through this team. So what did we do? We created HPM and LPM, high performance and low performance mindset. And that became a common language. And every single player, just about every single player in that squad had their own specific, unique mental framework that enabled them to better play in their high performance mindset. Doesn't mean that no players dropped down to their low performance mindset. They did against Roma, for example, and I can speak to that. But by and large, they stuck to their HPM, their high performance mindset. To me, it is inexcusable that any team doesn't offer what we call shared mental models to enable the team to work together to be able to keep attention, intensity, intent until the final whistle, no matter what. So one can say substitute, and I hear you and I understand that. And absolutely, this is a complicated game with multi-dimensional causalities. And maybe the substitution did have something to do with it, but ultimately you have to have mental frameworks, and it hardly exists in the Premier League. And so when it starts going wrong, everybody points at everybody else. Everybody looks at everybody else. And so subsequently, you just cannot put your finger on what's gone on. But your team in the final few seconds there, because they've got something to lose, they've played with inhibition, hesitant. They've been inhibited and hesitant. They've been uncertain and doubting. They're just trying to get to the end. That makes a difference to their awareness, their anticipation, their decision making. It makes which makes a difference to their capacity to execute their actions. And it all adds up. But it starts with this sudden fear of not wanting to lose. When you conceded that first goal. So it's a chain reaction. Sorry, got on my high horse there, but it
that's
winds me up.
Sorry, Dan, go on.
I was just going to say, you felt like you was going away from it then, but you was actually taking us to what happened last game, because 84th minute, I think it was 84th minute. 84th minute, we're 2-0 up. We're cruising. We're going for the third goal, and we've never been so happy as Everton fans. We feel like we've found something to make us good this season, the best we've played in a long time. And then all of a sudden, Bournemouth score. And it feels like what you just said, we went through what you just said, like we had something to lose. Yeah. And the moment, it was like a Mexican wave through the players. And we're like, what the heck's happened here? Because we couldn't believe it was 2-1. And we're shocked that we've even given Bournemouth a chance to get the draw. And then all of a sudden, because we're in that shock and not reacted like you've just said, we conceded another. It was like a boxer seeing stars. We just conceded another, and then even more shock. Bournemouth then went on to beat us. So it goes with completely what you're saying. I kind of wish you was. We need you, Dad. We need you at those moments like that, because what you just said, we need to switch on, and what you was working with the players. We need that with our Everton players, because not many teams concede 3 goals from 84th minute to lose when you're 2-0 up.
It was a very drastic, overt example of what I'm talking about. And that's why I wrote about it the next day, because I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody. But it was a really graphic illustration of what happens when you experience performance anxiety. And really the technicalities, the psychological technicalities underpinning it is it's performance anxiety in that moment. From the 84th minute onwards, your players are experiencing performance anxiety. What happens is the intensity increases internally, but that causes inhibition. It's as you said, you've got something to lose, and when you've got something to lose, you tend to play on the back foot rather than the front foot. You play with fear rather than with freedom. And you play not to lose rather than to win. And that is what you need there in that scenario. Is you need your senior players, your leaders, and you need to work on this every day. Small group conversations need to be happening around this a couple of times a week, identifying many opportunities for senior players to be able to drive the leadership through the team. So in the 84th minute, that's the opportunity, just finding many opportunities to make sure, having a buddy system, having a pair system, having a pod of 4 players who can communicate together in order to stay in their high performance mindset. That's imperative. As soon as that goal goes in, it's 3-1. That is your trigger to really have the right communication across the team to stay in your high performance mindset. It's absolutely imperative. It really, really is. But you know what? You're in good company. And obviously it's been exacerbated because of where you are and because of the current situation at Everton. But it's not as if every other club are doing this very well. I can assure you they're not. I know for a fact that they're not. So, but yeah, look, I think if maybe if Everton did that, it might be useful. It might be.
Do you know, before we go on to
I was just going to say, it's like, I'm so glad you said this, because I bang on about fear of failure all the time, to the point that I must bore Dan to death, because And the Bournemouth game was the prime example. Like I say, it was an over example, if anything, because before they scored their first goal, and then Dye was on the pitch and basically running the game. Everything, all the passes were going through him. The whole side didn't play like that. They didn't play as though they were holding on to something. And I think we often see a fear of failure from that side. And it used to be very evident when, for example, we had Lampard being manager, because it was a mixture of his maybe stubbornness to play a particular way, but we didn't want to give the ball away, but also to our detriment. So the ball would just go across the back four, and then we wouldn't take a chance, and it would go back across the back four, and then actually we'd lose because they would then pressure us. And so what happened before Bournemouth scored their first goal was that we were free flowing, and the passes that would not usually come in over 5-10 yards, and the players who would not normally turn on the ball, they were doing those things. And so the whole sort of atmosphere and ethos of the team and the fans was on a completely different scale than we've had for quite a while, to be honest. But then, like you say, as soon as that first goal went in, it was fear of failure again. And it was, I'm not going to put in a 10-yard pass to someone who's facing me in case they get tackled. So I'm going to launch the ball over the top, but then there's no one there. And I think Bournemouth sensed that. So from their sort of side, from their sort of mindset, they could tell, oh, they've taken off Ndiaye, or they've not done this, and we've put on 5 fresh players. And they just moved forward and forward and forward. And they were in a stronger position emotionally, I think, in order to get that win.
Yeah, look at that. And again, giving you some absolute, and I love what you said there about Bournemouth sensed it, because these players they do sense what's going on. They sense momentum. If you think, football is a game of 3 M's: mindset, moments, and momentum. And again, this is a model I created for Feyenoord just to help illustrate what we were trying to do. If everybody listening can picture this high performance mindset at the bottom of the screen, leading up to moments, winning the moment, leading up to managing momentum. Football's a game of momentum, for and against. And when you've got momentum for, you want to keep it. When you've got momentum against, you want to wrestle it back. How do you do that? With both of them, you try to win your moments. You've got to win as many moments as possible. And winning moments can be as basic as, closing down space, covering space. It could be winning your duels, winning your 1v1, but it could actually be a brave pass out of the back, right? And to do that, you've got to be in your high performance mindset. And the psychology is both complex and simple that underpins this. When you watch football, stop watching the action, stop watching the behaviors, and start thinking about the thoughts, emotions, feelings that players are experiencing underneath the behaviors. The brain works in milliseconds. Football works in seconds. The brain works in milliseconds. Okay, so the brain trumps football for speed every single time. And the thing about the human brain is it's constantly judging what's going on around us. That's a human survival mechanism. We have to have had that for a couple of 100,000 years. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived as a species. We wouldn't have been able to sense what's going on around us and how to respond. And the way our social environment works is through rewards and threats, essentially rewards and threats. So we sense rewards, we sense threats. So the threat is, crikey, we're 3-1 up. Okay, don't lose this, don't lose this, don't lose this. The brain's working in milliseconds, so the players are constantly judging. They're constantly having thoughts, emotions, feelings. They start to feel anxious, feel worried, feel doubting, feel scared, feel fearful. Okay, thoughts are flying in and out of their head. Don't mess up. I don't want to get. They're in that moment. Some of them are like, I don't want to get on the ball. Don't want to get on the ball. And there's a mini bit of hiding going on. They're slower to anticipate, as I said earlier, slower to make decisions, because thoughts, emotions, feelings are engulfing them in that moment, rather than being able to detect the cues, the clues, the triggers that are going on around them. And so, they've really got to untangle that. And again, that's why the message at Feyenoord was HPM, 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 stay in HPM. What do we do here? We stay in our high performance mindset. We don't care who we play against, where we play, when we play. We're in our high performance mindset. That's what you need to start having through the change room, the dressing room. You absolutely have to have that. We don't care where we play, when we play. We'll go to the Etihad. We'll go to White Hart Lane. We'll go to Anfield. We don't care. We will play in our high performance mindset. That means on the front foot, purposeful, positive, proactive. If you beat us, you beat us. Well done. Good. We go again next week. But we will never come out of HPM. If you beat us, you beat us. Well done, you. Great job. We go again next week in our HPM. You've got to have that attitude. But when you're LPM, low performance mindset, week in, week out, you're just dead. You're just dead.
Poor TV just mentioned, and this might obviously be relevant. So, is it a worst nightmare when you see players clock watching or asking how long there is to the referee? Are they sort of signals of that anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. Physiological signature of where a player is. Look, you might get a player who's experienced and's got enough wherewithal to just detect wants to know what the time is in order to, use that piece of information for them to, defend more effectively or make a decision about how they're going to execute the role, the responsibilities within their role. There is that element, but by and large, if a player isn't immersed in what they're doing, if they're not paying attention to, as I said, the cues, the clues, the triggers around them, staying connected to the game, staying connected to the runs, the movements, the actions of their opposition, of their teammates, that's where they need to be immersed, not in worrying about how long there is, until the final whistle. So, that I don't think it's my worst nightmare, but I think it's an indication that somebody isn't in their high performance mindset, that they're not competing connected to the game. That's how I define attention. Attention is your number one skill in any sport, in many respects, number one mental skill, and that is to be focused and connected to the game, connected to your responsibilities, connected to the opposition, connected to your teammates, connected to the space, the ball, the relationship between all of those, to your tasks, to your instructions. That is what attention is. You come away from that and you're going to get found out.
I was just going to... Well, we're talking about players now, which we've just chucked on the screen. Nice and free-flowing this. I'm going to jump back on one thing I had in my head that I wanted to say about Shawn Dyche. I'm going to go back to players, what we're talking about. But it feels like Shawn Dyche for me, and by the way, Dan is saying nothing on Shawn Dyche. He doesn't speak about anyone. He just speaks about situations, what he's been through. Just how to deal with those moments. He's not directed at anyone, but... It feels like Shawn Dyche is stubborn, set in his ways, and Shawn Dyche has come in and he gets these players working hard, which I really like. And I like some things about Shawn Dyche. But then I honestly do feel as a manager, Shawn Dyche is at that point now where if he did change his ways just a little bit, he could be so good for us. Like if he wasn't so stubborn, if he had someone like you, I don't even know if he's got a psychologist, but if he had someone like you to just talk and open his head, open his mind just a little bit to different things, he could evolve and do really well for us as a manager. There just seems there's so many things that are just stopping him from, like, he just needs to evolve a little bit and he's staying in that way. And it's the things that Dyche is getting wrong, by the way, for the frustrating us fans, are just such simple things that I feel that he could sort out maybe with a psychologist or something like that. I don't think personally Dyche would have a psychologist, but it's frustrating because I do feel he's got these players working hard, but he just needs to be a bit more open-minded, and he could be good for us. He could be good.
Yeah, look, I hear you. You're passionate, and you're passionate about Everton, and obviously it's not started well. It might improve. As you said, I need to be. I'm ethical, and I can't speak about Shawn Dyche, and I have only but respect and admiration for him and all that he's achieved, and he's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. To speak to what you're saying, though, there's a psychological phenomenon called inattentional blindness, inattentional blindness. And I don't know, I might say something here and you might look at me as if I'm mad and you've never heard of it, but there was an advert that went around years ago that showed a psychological experiment whereby there was a bunch of, and it was played in cinemas, and I think it was played on TV, where there was a bunch of basketball players throwing a basketball, and you were asked to count the number of throws. Does this ring a bell at all? and there's a gorilla that walks across the screen, and you don't see the gorilla if you're counting the throws.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You can go on YouTube. I've ruined it for you now, and I've ruined it for everybody listening.
It sounds good, though.
Basically, it's another psychological thing. You can't unsee it now that I've told you, right? But basically, you don't see the gorilla if you're counting the throws. It's an example. It's from an experiment that's done in the late 70s from two psychologists called Simon and Chabris, and they studied inattentional blindness. It's basically, as human beings, we all have inattentional blindnesses. We don't know what we don't know, essentially, and we don't see what we don't know. Our perception of the world around us is very skewed on what we know about. So, look, if you don't know something, then you don't see the game in that way, or you don't see things in that way, and that's what makes the world complicated and complex and vicious and wonderful and brutal and ruthless, is that we all have different lenses of the world. We all have different personalities. That, again, personality is based on inattentional blindness in many respects. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon. Whether what you're saying is true, I don't know, but you're certainly passionate about it, Dan.
Yeah, we all. I think we all are. Football just gets you, doesn't it, when you love them? We talked a lot about players. We'll kind of just finish on players now. Then we'll have a little talk about the fans, and then we'll just finish on talking on a little bit on the mental health. But when you were speaking about the players, it felt like everything that you were saying could help the players and what we're struggling with. I don't know whether you felt that, Paul, as well. Like, just everything that you were saying was like, well, that's what we're not doing. Like, you're saying they've got to stay switched on, the milliseconds and stuff like that. Players' heads are going everywhere. And I was starting to think, yeah, our players are like that. The heads are going everywhere, and they probably are having 1,000 thoughts where if they wasn't and the head was clear. But I don't get why we haven't just got someone like you just putting that into them.
Well, look, maybe
it could help them.
Yeah, maybe you do. I really don't know. I know Everton have a really strong performance and medical department, and you probably do. I know they've had this kind of support over the years, but there's different forms of sports psychology, and there's different sports psychology.
Sorry, Dan, I was just going to say we have a performance psychologist. Is that going to be the same?
Yeah. Absolutely, but everybody goes about things in a different way, and everybody chooses to work differently. I choose to work how I work, and I've got to a place in my career where I don't give a damn anymore. I'm just going to say what I say, and I'll put myself out there. And if a club or a team don't want to utilize me effectively, and they want me to sit in the office halfway down the hall somewhere, then I'm the wrong person for them. So I firmly believe, ultimately, to speak to your point, Dan, what I believe any player needs in any team is a mental framework that they can fall back on. They need to know. And when I say mental framework, that's a posh way for just saying they just need a few mental techniques in order to help them compete with attention, intensity, intent, right? Those are the 3 mental skills I tend to target. What I would say to that is that if a player cannot tell you what they're trying to achieve mentally come game day in 15 seconds of asking them, then they don't know. And that's a big problem. And I can guarantee you most players, if you ask them, what are you trying to achieve mentally when you go and compete, there will be tumbleweed floating across the ground with most of them, because they just don't know, because this stuff doesn't exist as emphatically as I'm purporting it should do. So and that's what I experience when I work with players and I ask them what they're trying to achieve. Most can't answer that. So in my work, I want them within 15-30 seconds to be able to tell me, yep, Dan, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing X, Y, Z, and I'm this is what I'm going to go and do. And irrespective of the score, irrespective of who I'm playing against, irrespective of the past 10 minutes, irrespective of how my teammates are playing, and so on and so forth, they've got to be able to stick to that high performance mindset. They've got to be able to execute with attention, intensity, and intent. That is vital. That's what every player needs, irrespective of who they play for.
You are basically a manager, the way I see it. That you're a manager on the like from what you're saying, you're a manager on the player. So say you're working with a player now and you're trying to get his head right, and that player's struggling massively. You come in, you get this player's head right, massively goes up, starts performing really well. You must take massive pride in that. And I'm sure you would have gone through those moments where you've gone, put the jigsaw piece in. You've gone, found the combination, got into his head, found a way, and connected that player. Because we have a couple of players where if they was just given that right piece, you can see they just need that confidence to grow into themselves, but they haven't got the missing pieces like you to put the things together. I can feel that.
Look, it's really, really important. Thank you. I think it's important to say that, and I'll come back to how we did this at Feyenoord the past 2 seasons, is that everybody is a psychologist within their role. And it's about optimizing the environment. And to do that, you have to make sure, I think, as a sports psych, that everybody is speaking as close to the same language as possible. Hence why we did HPM and LPM, because the physios can reinforce that. Everybody can be all in on that. And the players are psychologists. They're not psychologists per se. They're not professional psychologists. That's not what I'm saying. But they do psychology within their role as players. The coaches do psychology within their role as coaching staff. I'm a small part of the jigsaw puzzle that maybe is somebody who helps the organization make sense of the psychological aspects of competing and learning and engagement. The difference between myself, you mentioned me being a manager. The difference between myself and a manager or a head coach is that the manager or head coach has an expertise on football. They know the behaviors, they know the language, they know the domain. They have the domain specific knowledge of the game. I don't know formations. I don't know any of that stuff. I kind of do, but I don't really know that stuff. I don't get involved there. But what I am is, I'd like to think, half decent expert on human engagement, so participation, human learning, so helping people develop, and human performance, so helping people compete. Engagement, learning, and performance. And absolutely, it's satisfying when you do something and it helps somebody. But it's also important to realize that there's no heroes here. It's everybody all in helping each other. Those are the best cultures to be in. Nobody's a hero. And this is starting to happen now, is you're not going to have your Sir Alex Fergusons anymore, because it's not about anybody's a hero. It's an all-in feel, and it's happened just across the road from you at Liverpool, in as much as you don't have a manager, you have a head coach. You have an organization that is, the culture is organization driven. With, I can't say everybody's all in on a shared language. I don't know. I don't think they are. But it's not about heroes. It's about an organization having a system in place, working systemically across each department, where everybody is all in, trying to help players be the best that they can be. And the head coach or the manager isn't. They are the most important person there in many respects, but they aren't like they used to be. Because that head coach and manager now has to understand there's a whole raft of expertise that they haven't got a clue about, and it's about bringing in the right people to drive that expertise, to drive those messages. There's no heroes. It's just all in.
And I would say from a manager's point of view, if you have someone, even just one person, if they're vocal enough, who doesn't buy into the ethos and the ethic and everything else, it can just disband it. It can just make it almost impossible and very difficult to get everyone on board, because then there's that sense of doubt, isn't there?
Yeah, look, I would say to you that the antidote to push back on certain messages is to have a strong and all-in feel. It becomes very difficult to have disaffected, or it lessens the chances of having disaffected players when you've convinced the senior players and the main group of players around what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. Again, I'm going to be a broken record here and come back to HPM and LPM. Did every single player at Feyenoord buy into high performance mindset and low performance mindset? Probably not. That would be a ridiculous thing to think. But a lot did, and a lot used that term, and Arne used that term. And so when enough people use that term and enough people buy in, then the dissenting voices become suffocated, and you give a lot more oxygen to the terms you're trying, and the processes and the practices you're trying to bring in. And that's why it's so important. You know, if a player doesn't really like HPM, high performance mindset, for example, but they're walking into the medical department, and the physios and the strength and conditioning coach and the sports scientist and the head of medical are using that language, and they're driving it and they're passionate about it, then it becomes then that's a lonely place for that player, because they've got nobody to bitch to. So you know, there's more chance of having an all-in, all-on-board feel. And that's why it's so important. I mean, for me, and I've witnessed this in my career over the past 18, 20 years, is managers have lost their job because they become isolated, because they haven't put the shared mental models in place, because they don't have shared language across the departments that are going to drive this. You know, they've seen themselves maybe as the hero, maybe as I'm the manager, I'm the all-knowing, all-seeing. That doesn't wash so much anymore. You know, you really do have to share a little bit of power, and you have to understand you don't have all of the knowledge and all of the expertise, and it's people, you're going to bring people in who are going to know a lot more about other areas. Managers have forgotten more about tactics than I'll ever know, but I damn well know a hell of a lot more about psychology than they know. So if you're not going to listen to me or any of my colleagues as sports psychologists, that is a mistake to make.
Have you ever watched Ted Lasso, Dan?
Sadly, I have. Yeah, I have. I used to live in that area, actually. The sports psychologist on Ted Lasso does not depict real life psychology. Let's get that one out of the way straight away.
Oh, shame that. I'm gutted now.
I was just going to move it on to, I mean, we've got two more topics now. We're going to just say a little bit on fans. I've seen some comments come in on fans and stuff like that, just to talk about how we cope. And then we're just going to finish with the show with Dan giving us probably something that we need just in life, not even football, just a little good pointers how to deal with life, with mental health, because we do struggle sometimes. He'll probably give us some inspiring quotes, because I could listen to him all night. It is cracking, some of the stuff you're saying. Really, really interesting. I just found myself drawn into what you're saying. So, fans, here's a topic that I put on. We are. I mean, said it to you earlier on, basically. We're struggling. We've gone through 3 seasons. We're drained. We're scarred. And we're going into the new stadium. It does feel like the light's there. Things could get better. But what do we do as fans? Like, any suggestions? You probably know how we are at the minute, or what would you say?
Wow, that's the hardest question of the night, because it's tough when you're a fan, because it's just out of your control. You know, you can influence things a little bit by your voice, by your support, but ultimately what's going on is out of your control. And when things are that your biggest source of stress in life are things that are out of your control, right? So it is, first of all, it's acknowledging it's hard. I think it's without sounding too cheesy here, it's reflecting on the good times. It's reminding yourself why you do support the club. It's perhaps reminding yourself that if you do get relegated, boy, the championship is exciting and plentiful with lots of games.
You should hear us on the show. We are like therapy. After a game, we go through getting all of our anger out, but we know as towards the end of the show, we don't like to finish on a negative. So we get the stuff off our chest during the game, rant it out, and then towards the end, you'll see Paul find some inspiring thing like, well, you know, this was good, and then this was the next game's this, and you find something, because you hate us, because we are supporters, and you hate as a supporter to be not doing your part. So you always try and lift your fans at the end.
Of course, and look, several things for me, and I don't know if it speaks to your point, but what I would say is that, and I've got, you know, I've not been a footballer, I've not been a professional footballer, so I've got no skin in this game. I've never met a player and I've never met people behind the scenes who've never wanted to do well. players want to do well. They really do. Even when you see a player who's had an absolute beast of a game, that player's not gone on the pitch to do badly. Trust me, he doesn't want to do badly in front of 40,000 fans. That players don't play well because they drop in confidence. Players don't do well. They have poor moments or poor halves or whatever because they succumb to anxiety. And again, to kind of repeat myself, they don't have the tools and the techniques in place. Maybe you could argue if they're guilty of anything, they're just too guilty of being too passive with their development, and they're not proactive learners enough, and they need to go off and find the right people around them to help them learn if the club aren't going to provide what they need. Maybe you could argue they're guilty of that, but football, like most team sports, are very interesting in as much as everything's been put on a plate for you since you were 8 years old. When you're a professional golfer like I was, yes, I was a very bad pro golfer, but you're going out there and you're finding your own physio, your own psychologist, your own coach. You're finding all the people around you because you've got to do that as an individual sports person. When you're a team sports person, in many respects, you become, we talk about habits and patterns, you build the habit and pattern of just having things done for you. And so if footballers are guilty of anything, they're just not proactive enough with their own learning. Okay. But every player wants to go out and do well. And every manager and coaching staff is striving to do the best that they can possibly do. Whether that competence is enough is always up for debate. But they're always striving to do well. And you do have to remind yourself of that as a fan. And it is. Look, yes, these players get a lot of money, and that is the big bugbear when people see players playing poorly and they reflect on, the rewards these people are getting. I understand. I really do understand. At the same time, wealth never inoculates you from stress. Stress of a game, stress of life. Okay, these are human beings. And wealth doesn't tool you up to deal with performance anxiety. Wealth doesn't come built with techniques to help you raise your confidence. So again, we can moan all we want about how much these players are making or whatever, and the wonderful life that they have, which they do. But life becomes normalized pretty quickly, and that's what I would say there. Nobody goes out to do badly. They are training hard. They are working hard. They are trying to be the best that they can be with the tools that they have or they know about. So there's that. So and the other thing I would say is that the players do hear fans. They do feel the atmosphere in the stadium. I know this because I've worked with them for 20 years. I know this because I've helped some of them through tough times where fans have been on their back. And again, that is me understanding why fans might be on their back. They're frustrated. They're paying money to be there. They're passionate about their team, of course. At the same time, being on their back doesn't necessarily help them. Venting your frustration doesn't necessarily help them. I understand why one would vent one's frustration, but it doesn't necessarily help them. So getting behind them, maybe even when you're 3-0 down or 2-0 down, as tough as that might be to do, and as backward as that might feel to some people, that is the best thing that fans can do. I think there's a psychological experiment in there somewhere whereby a team drops down by 2 goals and the fans get louder and more behind their team. I'm not saying that will ever happen, but I just wonder if that would turn a result around. There's too much complexity to be able to measure that. There's too many confounding variables, but I do wonder if that could happen. Fans do matter. They do matter. And
I have seen, on what you're saying, I have seen a couple of videos where when I've watched the highlights, we've got some good songs. Like we sing a song like, I don't know what song we were singing, but we start singing the song. You can hear it. We're loud. Our fans are the best. We're singing the song, and then all of a sudden Everton pick up and we have a chance and we nearly score. Just through the pickup of a song. It kind of goes with what you're saying. And I could hear the song like, we are the goodest, and it gets louder and louder. We're passing the ball. We have a chance. And all of a sudden that can be the boost you need. So I do think fans matter.
I was going to say I've been at many games when we've been 2 down, or we've been in such strife. But then, even coincidental, there's just an event that happens. So, years ago we were 2-0 down at Wimbledon last day of the season. We've got to win. Limpar takes a tumble in the box. We score a penalty. Suddenly, the absolute attitude of the whole ground changes. The Palace game a couple of years ago, getting back 2-0, Palace have a chance to go 3-0 up. They don't take it. And even just that, we were still in the game. And so the momentum then changed for the fans, and it grew and grew and grew. And there's a famous saying about our greatest manager that we ever had, Howard Kendall, where we played Bayern Munich. We were 1-0 down at half time, and in the semi-final Cup Winners' Cup. And he tells the players, just keep going, and Gladys Street will suck the ball in. As in, those fans will grab you, and figuratively, they will grab the ball and they will put it in the net as long as you keep going. And that is so much what you've said there. You can't factually say for sure, but I think it's innate of all fans that we feel as though that can still happen. No matter what is going on, we can still make a difference.
It's interesting what you said about Howard Kendall there, because I would just say that's absolutely brilliant coaching, and maybe it was indicative of the times. But, really, again, the science would be, if I go back to those mental skills of attention, intensity, intent, it's the intent piece, because basically intent is a direction of energy. So intent in a high performance mindset, you have energy forward. So purposeful, positive, proactive. Think about your players with energy forward, purposeful, positive, proactive. Then think about the converse, the opposite in the low performance mindset, LPM, which is energy back, which is inhibited, hesitant, passive. We want energy forward. And I don't think it is stretching the realms of possibility, and you're speaking to this, that the fans are going to have a big part to play in terms of energy forward, because, as you say, it's mindset, moments, and momentum. Mindset influences moments, which influences momentum. And books have been written about momentum in sport. This is a massive thing, and a team needs the capacity to manage momentum, and fans can play a big part. In the unlikely circumstances that I was ever in the hierarchy of a single club, I would very much try to push on a systemic policy of really being as open with the fans and getting the fans on board as much as possible, and as being as open and honest about what we were doing, and really trying to find ways to communicate to fans to keep the energy forward in the stadium as much as possible. Because as soon as the fans turn against players, by and large, it then creates energy back. Because whilst all players won't necessarily say, oh yeah, I hear the fans, enough do, and enough of it evokes anxiety to make a difference. And again, that's not me having a go at fans, because I understand where fans are coming from. But at the same time, if anything, it's me having to go at clubs, because I don't think clubs communicate well enough with fans in terms of their capacity in those home grounds to actually influence moments and mindset, moments and momentum out there. I really believe that.
Well, I don't think it was a coincidence of when everyone was in lockdown that the percentage of away wins increased massively across the league.
Interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Yeah, the home effect. That's another topic in psychology that's studied, the home ground effect. Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say you bang on what you're saying, because I can remember when we went to Burnley, Paul, Dwight McNeil, he ran his socks off to get to the player, just did that extra little bit of running, and we was like, yes. And then we told him to run to the other player, and he ran like a headless chicken to close every player down, and it got us fans so excited. And what you said, Dan, I think the players should sometimes just do this to spark the fans. Like a tackle goes in at the start of the game, you're buzzing, you're fighting for us, yes, we're behind you. And it's just little things. They don't feel like could get us on the side where they don't. And I feel that they could more.
But you see, you're making a really important point, because what you're doing there is you're not just getting the fans on board, you're actually energizing, you're engaging in actions that energize your teammates. So if you were to say that leadership in football is done in 3 ways on the pitch in many respects, you lead by action, you lead by energy, or you lead by instruction. Some players have the capacity to do all 3, very few. Some players can do 2. They lead by action, they lead by energy. And some players, they just don't speak. They don't lead by instruction or energy. They can lead by action, all right? But those actions, those energizing actions, are part of high performance mindset. Those are the comments. If you get the opportunity, whether it's a coach or a psychologist, having small group sessions with players, and you start getting players talking. Players don't talk enough in football. I promise you, this is a big problem in football. If you get players talking about this and you start posing these kind of questions, what can you do to energize yourself? Actions is massive. That would be one of the things I might be engaging in, given the opportunity to work at a club like Everton, is that starting to find out what are we going to do to be in our high performance mindset as individuals and as teammates. And a part of that is having these small group meetings where players can start to share ideas and start to create what we call shared mental models around energizing actions, right? Leadership action. These are absolutely imperative, and it just doesn't happen enough, because those kind of cultures have been socialized into, we go and train for an hour and a half, we come back in, we have a team meeting, but we don't do much more. And really, there's a lot more that can be done. Not ridiculous amounts more, but just half an hour here, half an hour there with these small group meetings to be able to enact precisely what you're talking about, that, Dan. It's not just for fans, it's for teammates as well. And it's to suffocate the energy of the opposition as well.
It was just linked to what you were saying with energy. Like you said, it was from listening to you. The energy, like you say, is passed on. And the fans getting that energy gives the players that energy to be confident. Then one player could pass that energy on to the other player. And when your stadium's rocking and the players are confident, that's when you're probably most powerful. And you're not even thinking any negative thoughts whatsoever, because the other one that you said is hostile, where you're sitting on your seat and you're nervous, and then the players probably on the pitch are a bit nervous because they can sense you being quiet. Even though you're saying nothing, they can sense that you feel something could go wrong. And the hostile, I've been there on both. You're hostile where you're scared and you just sit and watch because you think if you sing something could go wrong. So I do think that they have got to try and get the energy into the fans, because as a fan sometimes you can't go and sing when you look like you're going to concede a goal, because you'll feel stupid. You start singing, you're conceding, you're like, oh my, what's that draining starting again? So I can see it on that. We are going to move from players now, because I'm not going to keep Dan up all night. It is a late one, and it has gone longer than what I thought, but it's been cracking stuff, and I'm sure it'll be a good listen for you people to. You'll be enjoying it as much as us.
My £10,000 fee is being
donate, everybody. Donate.
I'm joking.
Go for me quick. Well, Begovic, when we had Begovic on, he signed for Everton after we had Begovic on. Dan, I'm not just saying this brand news because you're on the channel. Some of the stuff you say, I'm thinking, Dan, if I was in the Everton now, I'd be like, you've got the job. I like what you're saying. You're in, mate, because the stuff you're saying, honestly, is the stuff that we're struggling with. And I know we'll have people there, and it's not me saying Dan should go over someone else or anything like that. I'm just saying the stuff that Dan is saying doesn't feel like it's being put in place for us, because it feels like it's what we're struggling with and could help us so much this season. It really could.
Well, before you carry on, several things to say to that, which would be, one, these things are simple to talk about, not always easy to put into practice. So there's a difference between simple and easy. Number two would be, I'm sure you've got great support in this area, irrespective of whether one thinks it's working or not. And the third thing to say is, I'd always be delighted and honoured to work with Everton.
Good lad, that's it.
You're a very determined man. I like that you said you had an argument with the manager and put him wrong and stuff like that. And I feel that Everton need a couple of people to speak their mind and not just go with the flow. That's the problem. If you go with the flow, you're never going to fix a problem, are you? You need someone to challenge. And actually, if you can it's just like anything in life. You do need to, if you just carry on with things and not actually see the problem, then the problem is going to keep happening. So you do need to identify the problem. And that good lyrics by me there, that I'll probably put on a short. Here we go. Finishing on mental health. Just like, I want you to just chuck out some good things to help people. Because I do have people in DMs, and we do this channel because we do it because we're Everton fans. We do it to be positive. But me and Paul do like to, we always make sure we like get beyond good energy. Anyone that's someone's doing something for dementia, 10k a day bare feet, we just got behind him. We just promote it. We'll push out any sort of good energy. We like good vibes, but a lot of people are struggling. Sometimes people try and do things like charities because they are struggling with mental health. And I did speak to someone, and I said to him, we've got a psychologist on. He was like, "Oh, I might give that a listen," because he's struggling. A lot of people are struggling. Life's not easy. I tell you something, the brain it's a hard place sometimes, isn't it? So is there any tips that you could give to just maybe just put people back on track in life, or anything like that, or any wisdom words? Because you seem like you've got the lyrics.
Well, look, thank you guys. There's so much to be said about well-being and mental health. So many great people out there providing some great information. Let's see what I can provide here. Look, I think the first thing to say is, and this can relate to mental health and well-being, but also, you know, football as well, for those interested who are listening in. Your thoughts, emotions, feelings, human beings, in very simple, stripped back terms, but this is what is the beauty of this. In very simple, stripped back terms, we all consist of thoughts, emotions, and feelings under the surface. Okay, so both of you and myself, we all experience thoughts, emotions, and feelings. To think, to emote, to feel. Okay, that's what's going on inside of us. And it's really important to understand that as human beings, we can generate a thought, absolutely, but thoughts happen to us. You know, we have thousands of thoughts a day, most of which we don't generate on purpose, most of which is as a consequence of our brain firing in millions of patterns every single second. So thoughts happen to us. Emotions happen to us. Feelings happen to us. We don't do thoughts, emotions, feelings on purpose. So when we feel anxious or sad or worried or doubting or fearful or stressed or anxious, I think it's so important that we live in a world today that understands that we don't experience these on purpose, that these happen to us. So we got to forgive ourselves for experiencing thoughts, emotions, and feelings that we might consider to be negative or unhelpful. You know, and if you're going through a tough time and you're experiencing this quite a bit, if you're having a lot of what I call ants, ANTS, okay, A for automatic, N for negative, T for thoughts. A for automatic, N for negative, T for thoughts. Maybe we've lost a job, or maybe we're struggling to find a job, or maybe we've got family members who are sick, or maybe we're sick, or whatever tough time we're going through. You're going to have a lot of ants, automatic negative thoughts, and I'm going to bolt on emotions and feelings as well. So when I say ants, and I say this to players all the time with their football, you're going to have ants out there, automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings. Okay. So you're going to experience those. Give yourself permission to experience ants. It's okay to experience ants. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not abnormal. It's not unusual. You don't need to suddenly toughen up. Okay. That kind of philosophy isn't necessarily helpful. So allow yourself at times to experience those ants. That's okay. That's all right to have automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings. The wonderful thing about being a human being, when we feel ready to, is we can choose with some skills to be able to respond to the ants, the automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings that we experience. Okay, I'm going to say that again. We experience our ants, automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings. We don't do ants on purpose, but what we can do when we feel ready to, we can respond to the automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings that we're experiencing. And we can respond in multiple ways. For example, we can shift our focus of attention. We can do something as basic as playing some music to shift our focus of attention away from the ants. We can stand up and get out the room or get out the house and go for a walk. That simple, those actions and those movements shift our attention away from the ants, not all the time, but often. So they're squashing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings, and maybe help us for at least a brief period of time enjoy the surroundings. We can read a book, we can watch a film, we can have a conversation with somebody. We can breathe. For example, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And what that simple act does, that breathing, is it helps shift attention away from the ants, the automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings, onto something that cools and calms our nervous system. So I'm going to repeat this. It's okay to experience ants, automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings. We all do, especially during tough times, because there's so many things going on in the world right now, right? Let alone our normal day-to-day problems that might be meaning that you're engulfed in ants, that you've got an ant farm in your head, right? Okay. That's okay. Also, so give yourself permission to experience those. But when you feel ready, also recognize that you can respond to these. And the response is about doing something that shifts your attention away from the ants onto something that might be distracting or just a bit more enjoyable. And don't underestimate 1 minute of doing this. Even just a minute, even just 30 seconds of doing this can make a little bit of a difference to how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about the world and how we cope. Okay. Even just a few minutes shifting away from the ants onto something else can be really useful. And I think that's the final little tip I would do. If you are somebody who is busy in a job and everything comes thick and fast, try to factor in 1-2 minutes of mental health or well-being time, a few times a day. That's all it needs, or is 1 or 2 minutes, every hour or every couple of hours, or even just twice a day. Breathing, music, reading, conversation, fresh air, looking at nature, anything that turns down the volume of ants, automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings. I think that, to me, when I work with footballers, if I worked with Everton players, I would want them to squash their ants, and I would want them to help each other to squash each other's ants, especially against Bournemouth in the last 5 minutes of the game. But the ants has a bigger, broader, more important picture. As human beings, we need to learn to accept them, but then respond to them appropriately when we can, in order to have a happier, healthier, more flourishing, more thriving life where we can, with respect to our context and our situation. I hope that makes some sense.
That is some cracking lyrics, and I'm sure a lot of people will be listening to you, and we'll all have our little things that have probably happened with us that we can probably relate to you with there. And like, for example, we're often open on the channel because I like to be open, because if people are struggling, I like to know that it's not just you. Trust me, we're all been through different things, and we're all fine. Like, for example, losing my gran 2 years ago. When I lost my gran, you find a way, like you say, to distract you. And so at some point, you'll do something where it all comes back and floods back, but you have to do what you said, like just go to what distracts you again. And as bad as it is, you do have to distract yourself from that. And then don't forget, always comes back. But it is good, like you say, to find something in place, because then as you go on, that's why when something bad happens, as time goes by, you become more familiar with a way to deal with it. By what you're saying, you think, last time I did this, so I'll probably just think about that, or I'll go out and do a walk and go for a walk and do that, and you become used to ways that are going to help you with it. So your lyrics are cracking, to be fair. I've really enjoyed having you on. We did say an hour. It was an hour and a half, but I'm pretty sure there's some cracking stuff in there to make it worth the hour and a half. We'd love to have you on again if you're willing to come on.
Certainly, sir.
Really good talker. Have you enjoyed that, Paul? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Cracking,
amazing. Yeah, really good, really in depth, and we can, everything that we kind of spoke about as well. It definitely covered Bournemouth, but maybe it's helped us realise a little bit more about the ins and outs, about how the players and the managers are sort of feeling in the background, which is something we don't get very often. So,
brilliant. It always makes you look at the bigger picture. I have put Dan's stuff in the description. All his socials are there and stuff. Would like to get him on once a season. To be fair, we do get people come back on because they enjoy it. So, would like to get you on once a season. Going to drop the banner now. Go in the description. His stuff's there. Give him a follow. Do you want to plug yourself up on anything? I think it's all there in the description, isn't it?
I'm sure it's there. It's danabrahams.com, where you can see all my stuff, all my books, and my podcast is the Sports Psych Show, where it's an excellent podcast because I'm a distinctly average host, but I have wonderful guests who bring sports psychology to life. We do real deep dives into this area if you're interested. So the Sport Psych Show.
Well, we've loved Dan. So if Dan is saying his guests are even better, get on
much better than
sounds
me.
Like it's
so much better than me.
Maybe he just doesn't like to big himself up, but we've loved having you on. So get on that as well. I'm going to drop the banner, everyone, now. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that. I've loved it, and we'll keep getting cracking guests on like this. Of course, we will. Toffee Bluecast doing its thing. Dropping the banner now, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.